Don't worry, Mom. I'll cut that up for you. We don't want you having any accidents with a knife. Brenda's voice was as sweet as the apple pie cooling on the counter. She smiled at me from across my own dining room table, the one my late husband, Tom, and I had bought 40 years ago. My son, Mark, was busy loading his plate with another slice of roast chicken. He didn't even look up. Brenda reached for my plate, her perfectly manicured nails glinting under the chandelier. She took my knife and fork and began cutting my chicken into small, neat squares, the way you would for a toddler. A hot flash of shame crawled up my neck. I could feel the eyes of my niece and her husband on me. They looked away quickly, studying their own plates. My hand, resting on the table, trembled just a little. It wasn't the shame that scared me. It was the cold fear that followed, the kind that smells like disinfectant and sounds like the lonely hum of a television in a nursing home. My independence was at stake, and Brenda was holding the knife. A few days later, Brenda started her campaign of helping. It began with the mail. I always enjoyed my morning routine: a cup of tea, the newspaper, and sorting through the bills and letters. But now, Brenda would get the mail from the box before I even had my slippers on. She'd sit at the kitchen table, the crisp sound of envelopes tearing filling the quiet house. "Okay, Eleanor," she'd say, her voice bright and efficient. "This is junk. Prescription refill notice? This looks important." She sorted everything into little piles. My private letters from my sister, my bank statements. All of it passed through her hands first. Then it was my appointments. "I'll put everything into a shared calendar on your phone," she announced one afternoon. "That way, we all know where you need to be." My son, Mark, thought she was a saint. "It's amazing, Mom," he said, watching her tap away on her own phone. "Brenda is so organized. She's taking so much off your plate." He kissed my forehead, the faint scent of his aftershave a familiar comfort. But he didn't see what I saw. My plate wasn't getting lighter. It was being taken away from me, piece by piece. That weekend, Mark stayed behind after Brenda left to run errands. He was helping me clear the table, his shoulders slumped. He looked tired, with new lines etched around his eyes. He picked at a loose thread on the placemat, avoiding my gaze. "The new business venture. It didn't work out, Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We're in a bit of a hole. A mountain of debt, really." My heart ached for him. I opened my mouth to tell him I could help, that my savings were his safety net. But the words caught in my throat. I saw Brenda's smiling face in my mind, sorting my mail, controlling my calendar. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a weary stress I hadn't seen since he was a young man starting out. "Thank God Brenda is so good at managing things," he said with a weak smile. "We'd be lost without her." I just nodded, but a cold knot was forming in my stomach. Was she managing his life, or was she managing his inheritance? The following Tuesday, I missed my cardiology appointment. I only realized it when Brenda called my cell phone, her voice tight with anger. "Eleanor, where are you? Dr. Miller's office has been trying to reach you for an hour." Mark got on the line next, his voice sharp with frustration. "Mum, how could you forget? This was important." But I hadn't forgotten. I distinctly remembered it. That very morning, I had looked at my phone's calendar while my coffee was brewing. The appointment was there. 2:00 p.m., Dr. Miller. I saw the little blue block on the screen as clearly as I saw the worried face in my mirror. When they arrived home, Brenda took my phone with a sigh. "Oh, Eleanor, this technology can be so confusing." She tapped and swiped, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There. I fixed the settings so you'll get louder alerts." She handed it back to me with a pitying smile. Later that night, when the house was finally quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator, I sat in my armchair and fiddled with the phone. I didn't know much, but I knew how to Google. I found an article about recovering deleted items. My fingers felt clumsy, but I followed the steps. And there it was, in a folder labeled Recently Deleted, Dr. Miller, 2 p.m. Someone had deleted it. And it wasn't me. The next day was sunny, and I was in the living room trying to read my book. The window was open, and I could hear Brenda in the garden talking on her phone. The scent of my prize-winning roses drifted in on the breeze. Her voice was light and sweet, but the words were poison. "She had another bad spell yesterday, Mom," Brenda said. I could hear the fake sympathy she was pouring into the phone. "Completely forgot her heart doctor appointment. Mark and I were so worried." There was a pause. I leaned closer to the window screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. "I know. It's just so sad to watch," she continued. "Honestly, she's just not all there anymore." I sank back into my armchair. The book fell from my lap onto the carpet with a soft thud. I stared at the wall, at the framed photos of my family, of Mark as a little boy, of Tom and me on our wedding day. In that moment, surrounded by a lifetime of my own memories, I had never felt more invisible. Brenda wasn't just talking to her mother. She was rehearsing a story for everyone else. I came home from my weekly church group feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The fellowship hall always smelled like weak coffee and lemon pound cake, a scent that meant friendship to me. I walked into my kitchen, planning to make a cup of my favorite Earl Grey tea, and stopped dead. Everything was different. The mugs weren't in the cupboard by the stove. The tea canisters were gone from the counter. Brenda walked in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, good. You're home. I did a little reorganizing for you, to make things more accessible." She opened a lower cabinet. My mugs were stacked precariously behind the pots and pans. "See? Now you don't have to reach up so high." I just stood there, my hand hovering where the tea used to be. The good silverware my mother had left me was gone from its drawer, replaced with plastic food containers. It felt like a stranger had broken in and moved all my memories around. It felt like an invasion. The next afternoon, the landline rang. It was my oldest friend, Sarah, calling for our Tuesday chat, a ritual we'd kept for 40 years. Her voice was like a warm blanket. We were talking about her new rose bushes when Brenda breezed into the room. She smiled at me, a tight, little smile, and gently took the heavy receiver from my hand. "Hi, Sarah. It's Brenda," she said into the phone, her voice dripping with false concern. "Eleanor's very tired today. I'll have her call you back when she's feeling more up to it." Before I could protest, she'd hung up. She patted my shoulder. "You need your rest, Mom. Don't want you getting overtired." She left the room, humming. A few minutes later, I felt a vibration from the pocket of my housecoat. I pulled out my little cell phone. It was Sarah. Her name glowed on the screen. "Eleanor," she whispered when I answered. "What's really going on over there?" We were sitting at the dining room table a few nights later, sorting through a pile of mail. Brenda had already separated it into what she called important and junk. I saw the familiar blue envelope from the Social Security Administration in her pile. She tapped a manicured nail on a utility bill. "You know, Mum, this is all getting to be a lot for you to handle." Mark nodded, not looking up from his plate. "She's right. It's a lot of paperwork." "What would make it so much easier?" Brenda continued, her voice smooth as butter. "Is if we got power of attorney, just to handle the bills and things. No more stress for you." My son finally looked at me. It's just a practical step, Mum, to protect you. The word protect felt cold and sharp, like the edge of a key turning in a lock. It started with small things. A pearl brooch my late husband, Robert, had given me for our 20th anniversary. I went to get it from my jewelry box for church, and the little velvet slot was empty. I searched the whole bedroom, my heart starting to thump with a familiar anxiety. Brenda, have you seen my pearl brooch? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced up from her magazine. Oh, you probably just misplaced it, Eleanor. You know what your memory is like these days. She said it so casually, without a hint of malice. Don't worry, she added, turning a page. It'll turn up. A week later, the little silver frame from my nightstand, the one with a picture of me and Robert on our wedding day, was gone. I started to feel like a ghost in my own house, watching my life get packed away piece by piece. The worst of it happened at the grocery store. Mark and Brenda had insisted on driving me. I'd always enjoyed my own shopping trips, the simple pleasure of picking out my own apples. At the checkout, I pulled my debit card from my wallet. Brenda reached over and snatched it from my hand. She turned to the young cashier, a girl with bright pink hair, and spoke in a loud, slow voice. Don't mind her. She gets confused with the card machine. She tapped my card on the reader for me, as if I were a toddler. The cashier wouldn't meet my eyes. She just gave me a quick look of pity. I had never felt so small. I stood there, clutching my empty purse, while the sounds of the store, the beeping, the rustling of plastic bags, faded into a dull roar in my ears. A letter came on a Tuesday. It wasn't in the neat pile Brenda made for me. It must have been stuck to a catalogue. The envelope felt cheap, and the logo was for a credit card company I hadn't used in 20 years. I took it to my room and closed the door, the click of the latch sounding very loud in the quiet house. I opened it with my thumb, tearing the paper carefully. It was a statement. My name was at the top, clear as day. The balance was $5,112, and there, listed as an authorized user, was Brenda's name. I ran my finger down the list of charges: a designer handbag, 3 separate spa days, a restaurant I had never heard of. These were not my purchases. This was not my life. Everything okay in there, Mum? Brenda called through the door. Her voice was as sweet as cherry pie. Just fine, dear, I said, my own voice sounding strange and far away. This wasn't just planning for my decline. This was theft. The fog of self-doubt that had clouded my mind for months burned away. It was replaced by a cold, hard anger that felt like a steel rod straightening my spine. I folded the credit card statement into a neat square. I walked to the closet and pulled out my old sewing box. The air smelled of cedar and lavender when I lifted the lid. Inside were spools of thread, my mother's silver thimble, and a lifetime of forgotten buttons. I slipped the statement underneath a piece of velvet lining. It was safe there. I closed the lid. For the first time in a year, my hands were perfectly steady. I was not losing my mind. I was being robbed. I walked back into the living room, where the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, lighting up dust motes dancing in the air. I had a plan. It was a small plan, but it was a start. I took my walk the next morning, but I went to the little park by the library instead of around the block. The air was crisp and smelled of cut grass. I sat on a bench and pulled out my cell phone, my fingers feeling clumsy on the little screen. I found Sarah's number. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" she asked. Her voice was a comfort. "I need your help, Sarah," I said, keeping my own voice low. "Can we meet? Somewhere Brenda and Mark wouldn't go?" We met at a small cafe across town, the kind with mismatched chairs and the rich smell of coffee beans. The bell over the door jingled when I walked in. I slid the folded statement across the table to her. She put on her reading glasses and smoothed it out. Sarah used to be a paralegal, and she read documents like other people read novels. She looked up at me, her eyes missing nothing. "It's a funny thing about getting older," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "They think you've become invisible, but they forget that means you can see everything." Sarah folded the paper and pushed it back toward me. "Don't confront them," she said, her voice firm. "Don't say a word. Document everything." The advice felt solid, like a stone I could hold in my hand. My first step was an electronics store. The air inside hummed with the sound of a dozen televisions, and the bright lights made me blink. I found what I was looking for: a tiny digital voice recorder, no bigger than my thumb. I paid for it in cash. The plastic packaging crinkled in my purse as I walked home. It felt heavy, like a secret. I walked in the front door, my heart thumping a little too fast. Brenda was standing in the hall, holding a vase of flowers. She smiled when she saw me. "What's in the bag, Eleanor?" "New knitting needles," I said, forcing a smile back. "The good bamboo ones from the craft store." The lie came out so easily it surprised me. Brenda just nodded, her attention already back on arranging the flowers. She only cared about things she could control. Later, when she was in the garden, I tested the little machine. I put it on the hall table, tucked behind a photograph of my late husband. The little red light blinked once, then went dark. A few minutes later, I heard Brenda's voice from the back patio, talking on her phone. It wasn't her usual sweet, concerned tone. This voice was sharp and mocking. "Oh, it's a piece of cake?" she said, followed by a laugh that made my skin crawl. "He's so stressed about money he'll agree to anything, and she's so far gone she doesn't know what day it is." I have them both wrapped around my little finger. Hearing her true voice was chilling, but it was also a relief. I wasn't imagining the monster. The monster was real. I told Brenda I was going to a church bake sale meeting. She smiled that sugary smile and told me not to tire myself out. The city bus hissed to a stop at the corner. I climbed on, my purse heavy on my lap, and watched my own neighborhood disappear through the dusty window. At the bank, the marble floor was cool and quiet. I sat across from the branch manager, a kind woman with silver glasses. I slid the credit card statement across her polished desk. "This account was opened in my name," I said, my voice steady. "But I did not open it." She looked at the statement, then at me. She didn't treat me like a confused old woman. She treated me like a victim of a crime. She cancelled the card immediately. She helped me put a security alert on everything. An hour later, I left with a thick manila folder full of my financial statements from the past year. The weight of it felt like armor. I didn't go straight home. I sat on a park bench and watched children on the swings. I felt the rough paper of the folder under my fingers. The fear I had been living with for months was finally gone. In its place was something cold and clear. On the bus ride home, I thought about Brenda. I thought about my son, Mark. They weren't taking care of me. They were managing an asset. I got home just before Brenda. She was humming as she put away the groceries. She didn't even ask about the bake sale. It was never about the bake sale. The next morning, I waited until Brenda took her car to the salon. I went into my bedroom, closed the door, and dialed a number I knew by heart. Mr. Davies had been my financial advisor for 30 years. He helped my husband and me plan for this very time in my life. "Eleanor," he said. his voice warm and familiar. It's good to hear from you. Is everything all right? No, George, it isn't, I said simply. I explained everything: the mail, the missed appointments, the credit card. I told him about the whispers and the way Brenda looked at my things. I didn't cry. My voice was as calm as a frozen lake. I am not losing my mind, but someone is trying very hard to make it look like I am. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint hum of his office in the background. I believe you, Eleanor. A person doesn't build a life like yours just to forget it overnight. Then he paused. And your call is very timely. What do you mean? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. Eleanor, a woman identifying as your personal assistant, called my office last week. She was asking about the process for liquidating some of your stock portfolio. My hand was gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. It was my daughter-in-law, Brenda, I said. My voice was barely a whisper. I suspected as much, Mr. Davies said. We have procedures, of course. I told her any changes would require your direct, verbal authorization. She said you were often unwell and that she was trying to get things in order for you. We sat in silence for a moment, the ugly truth hanging between us. Then an idea began to form in my mind, sharp and clear as a piece of glass. George, I said, if she calls again, I want you to welcome her. I want you to be helpful. Eleanor, I can't ethically. All your firm's calls are recorded for quality assurance, aren't they? I interrupted. You say it at the beginning of every call. He was quiet for a second. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp mind. Yes, he said slowly. They are, with all legal disclaimers clearly stated. Good, I said. Then let her talk. Let's give her all the rope she needs. The trap was being set. Now, I just had to wait for the mouse to go for the cheese. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through the box of travel brochures in my hall closet. I pulled out one for a luxury retirement community by the ocean. The paper was glossy, and the pictures showed smiling seniors playing tennis and drinking wine on beautiful balconies. I left it on the coffee table, right on top of Brenda's fashion magazine. Later, while we were watching television, I sighed dramatically. Oh, that place looks so lovely, I said, pointing to the brochure. But I imagine it costs a fortune. A person would need a lot of liquid cash to even think about it. I didn't look at Brenda, but I could feel her eyes on me. I saw her glance at the brochure, then at me, then back at the brochure. I saw the flicker of calculation in her eyes. It was the glint of pure, uncut greed. My son, Mark, just patted my hand. Don't worry about things like that, Mom. We'll take care of you. I just smiled and nodded. The bait was in the water. I wondered how long it would take for her to bite. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, my cell phone buzzed while I was in the garden, pulling weeds from my rose bushes. It was Mr. Davies. I wiped my dirt-covered hands on my apron and answered. It happened, he said. There was no preamble. My breath caught in my throat. Tell me. Brenda called half an hour ago, he said, his voice crisp and professional. She claimed you had a fall this morning and were too confused to speak on the phone. She said you had authorized her to begin the process of transferring your entire stock portfolio into a new joint account. An account in her name and Mark's. I sank down onto the little garden bench, the scent of damp earth all around me. I felt a wave of dizziness, but it was followed by a strange, cold calm. And you have it? I asked. You have the recording? The entire conversation is on a password-protected digital file, he confirmed. I will email it to you immediately. Eleanor? What she tried to do? It's a serious crime. I knew that. But a crime was loud. A crime involved police and courts. I had a much quieter, much more satisfying solution in mind. Mr. Davies sent me the audio file in an email, just as he promised. I waited until Brenda and Mark went out for groceries. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and put on the little earbuds that came with my phone. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound in the house. I clicked play. Brenda's voice filled my head. It was the sweet, syrupy one she used for strangers. "Oh, thank you for taking my call," she said to Mr. Davies. "I'm calling on behalf of Eleanor. She had a bit of a fall this morning, you see. Nothing broken, thank goodness, but she's terribly confused." I listened to her spin a web of lies about my health, my memory, my ability to make decisions. I heard her ask him to begin the process of transferring my stock portfolio into a new joint account, my entire life's savings. When it was over, I sat in the silence for a long time, my hands cold. There was no more sadness, no more fear, just ice. I downloaded the file onto a tiny USB drive, the kind you can hide in the palm of your hand. I walked over to my old sewing box, lifted the lid, and tucked the drive next to the fraudulent credit card statement. My resolve was as hard and sharp as a sewing needle. All I had to do now was wait. The big family Thanksgiving dinner was in 2 weeks. Everyone would be there. Brenda's parents, my sister, a few cousins. It was always at my house. During those 2 weeks, I was the perfect, agreeable mother-in-law. I smiled when Brenda corrected me. I nodded when she explained something simple, as if I were a child. I let her help me with the grocery list for the dinner. "Oh, Mom, you don't want that brand of cranberry sauce," she'd say, taking the can from my hand. "This one has less sugar. It's better for you." I'd just give her a soft, vacant smile. "Whatever you think is best, dear." I felt like a spider, sitting perfectly still in my web. She had no idea she was the one who was caught. Every gentle nod, every quiet "thank you" was another thread pulled tight. Thanksgiving morning arrived. The house filled with the warm, rich smell of roasting turkey and sage stuffing. The low murmur of the football game came from the living room television. Brenda was in her element, flitting around my kitchen, acting the perfect hostess. She wore a new apron and a bright, false smile. "Eleanor, don't you worry about a thing," she said, taking a serving spoon from my hand. "You just go sit and relax." I did as I was told. I sat in my armchair, the worn floral fabric soft against my back, and watched the clock. 10 minutes before the guests were due to arrive, I stood up. I walked over to my son, Mark, who was staring blankly at the TV. I touched his arm. "Can I speak to you in the study for a moment, dear?" I asked, my voice low and calm. "It's about the finances." In the study, I closed the heavy oak door. The click of the latch sounded very loud in the small, quiet room. The air smelled of old books and lemon polish. Mark looked nervous, probably expecting me to ask for money or complain about a bill. I didn't ask him to sit down. I walked to my little desk, my legs steady. "Before your wife joins us, and before our family arrives," I said, my voice even, "there is a recording I need you to hear." I didn't wait for him to answer. I pulled the small USB drive from my pocket. I slid it into the side of my laptop. I clicked on the file, turned the volume up, and pressed play. I didn't watch the computer screen. I watched my son's face. First, there was confusion as he heard Brenda's sweet voice. Then his eyes widened as she mentioned my fall. I saw his colour drain away as she told Mr. Davies I was too confused to talk, that I had authorized her to move all my money. The confident man who had stood by while his wife belittled me was gone. In his place was a pale, horrified stranger. His jaw was slack. His hands trembled slightly. He wasn't just hearing his wife's crime. He was hearing the echo of every time he had said, "She's just helping, Mom." He finally understood. I clicked the spacebar on my laptop, and the silence in the study was suddenly very loud. The only sound was the low hum of the old clock on the mantelpiece. I didn't look at the screen. I looked right at my son, Mark. "You have two choices," I said. My voice was as calm as a frozen lake. "You will go out there and tell your wife to pack a small bag and leave my house tonight. Or when your guests arrive, I will plug this laptop into the television in the living room. We will all listen to this together, including her parents. On Monday, a copy goes to my lawyer." He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Mom, the debt was so bad. Brenda, she handles everything." I held up one hand, a simple gesture that stopped his words cold. The smell of roasting turkey and sage stuffing drifted in from the kitchen. It smelled like a holiday, but it felt like a funeral. "Choose," I said. He finally broke. His shoulders slumped, and he looked down at the worn pattern on my study rug. He looked like a little boy again, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. The words were barely audible. Just then, the doorbell chimed, a cheerful three-note sound that cut right through the tension in the room. The first guests were here. Mark straightened his tie. He ran a hand through his hair, and when he looked up, his face was a mask of grim control. He walked out of the study without another word to me. I stood in the doorway, my old heart thumping a steady, determined beat against my ribs. I watched as he intercepted Brenda in the hall. She was carrying a platter of cranberry sauce, a bright smile on her face for the arriving company. He put a hand on her arm, pulling her toward the front door, away from the guests. I could hear their whispers. They were frantic and furious. Brenda's voice was a sharp hiss, like a snake in the grass. "What are you doing? My parents are right there." Mark's voice was low and unyielding, a stone wall she couldn't break. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew the tone of a man who had finally run out of rope. She tried to push past him, to get to her parents who were now taking off their coats, but he blocked her way. He was taller, stronger. For the first time, he was using his strength to protect me, not her. Suddenly she turned. Her face was a storm cloud. She wrenched open the hall closet, grabbed her expensive wool coat and her purse. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. She just stormed out, slamming the heavy front door so hard that a picture frame on the wall rattled. My late husband, George, smiled out from behind the glass, perfectly still. Mark walked back to the arriving guests, his face pale but composed. His voice was steady as he spoke. "I'm so sorry, everyone," he announced, managing a weak smile. "Brenda just received a call. A family emergency. She had to leave." Her parents looked confused, worried. Mark just guided them into the living room, his hand on his father-in-law's shoulder. The dinner was terribly quiet. Everyone tried to make small talk, but the empty chair at the table seemed to suck all the air out of the room. I calmly ate my turkey and mashed potatoes. Then, when it was time, I had a large slice of my homemade pumpkin pie with a dollop of whipped cream. The silence was delicious. After the last car pulled away, the house fell silent. The air was thick with the smell of cold turkey and uneaten pie. Mark sat at the dining room table, staring at the gravy stain on the tablecloth. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. He finally looked up at me. She had credit cards, Mum. In your name. She said you knew. I just nodded, gathering the dessert plates. The clink of porcelain was the only sound. He told me everything then. The failed business, the mountain of debt he'd hidden from me, the way Brenda had promised she could manage it all. His voice was flat, without emotion. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He just said, "I'll be out by the end of the week. I'm filing for divorce." He stood up, his chair scraping against the wood floor. "There's nothing left to save." The next morning, I met with my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. His office smelled of leather and lemon polish. I placed the credit card statement on his wide mahogany desk. He put on his reading glasses, and his face grew grim. "Eleanor, this is grand larceny." "I know," I said. "What do we do first?" We filed a police report for the credit card fraud. Then we spent 2 hours building a wall around my life. We started the paperwork for a new will. And then we created something called an irrevocable trust. Mr. Henderson explained it carefully. "Once it's in here," he said, tapping the folder, "no one can touch it. Not a future husband, not a creditor, not a child, no one." I signed the papers, my hand steady. It felt like I was signing my own Declaration of Independence. The locksmith came on Tuesday. He had kind eyes and smelled faintly of metal oil. He changed the locks on the front door, the back door, and the door to the garage. He handed me a set of 3 new, shiny brass keys. "There you are, Mom. All secure." That night, for the first time in over a year, I walked through my home, and it felt like my own. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't the tense quiet of waiting for Brenda's next criticism. It was peaceful. I ran my hand along the back of my favorite armchair, the fabric soft beneath my fingers. The only sound was the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was finally safe. Mark moved into a small, furnished apartment across town. I saw his expensive car was gone, replaced by a sensible little sedan. He got a second job on weekends, stocking shelves at the grocery store. He called me once a week, always on a Sunday evening. The calls were short. "Are you eating okay, Mom?" he'd ask. "Yes, dear. I made a nice pot roast today. Are you?" "I'm fine." The line would go quiet for a moment. Then he'd say, "Well, I'll let you go. Talk to you next week." I never knew if he was calling out of love or just out of duty. On a bright, cold morning, I picked up the phone and called Sarah. "I was wondering," I said, my voice a little rusty from disuse, "if you might be free for lunch." We went to a little diner with red vinyl booths. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. She reached across the table and patted my hand. "It's good to have you back, Eleanor." We started going for walks every morning after that, our breath making little white clouds in the crisp air. I went back to my church group, and the ladies welcomed me with hugs and casseroles. I felt the threads of my own life, the ones Brenda had tried so hard to cut, slowly knitting themselves back together. It felt fragile, but it felt real. I decided the big house had too many ghosts. Every corner held a memory of Brenda's condescending smile or Mark's worried eyes. The silence that had once felt like peace now just felt empty. It was time to move on. I called a realtor Sarah recommended, a no-nonsense woman named Carol. She took one look at the place, with its good bones and manicured lawn, and nodded. "We can sell this fast," she said, her voice crisp. "The market is hot for houses like this." She was right. It sold in less than a month for a wonderful price. I didn't waste a moment. I bought a bright, sunny 2-bedroom condo in a vibrant senior living community across town. It had a balcony for my plants and a big window in the living room that caught the morning light. Standing in the empty rooms, smelling the fresh paint, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The past was in a box, taped shut. Mark helped me move the heavy boxes. We worked in a comfortable quiet, a new understanding between us. He didn't offer advice or try to take over. He just lifted what I asked him to lift and assembled the little bookshelf for my reading corner. I unpacked my favorite things first: the soft, worn armchair, the small desk for writing letters, and my blue and white china tea set. "Can I make you a cup of tea, dear?" I asked, once the kettle was plugged in. "I'd like that, Mom," he said, his voice a little rough. We sat on mismatched dining chairs in the middle of the boxes, sipping our tea. The afternoon sun streamed through the big window, warming my face. For the first time, it felt like my new life was truly beginning. At the community orientation, I sat in the back of the large, air-conditioned hall. The woman running the meeting pointed to a bulletin board covered in flyers for book clubs and water aerobics. Tacked to the very centre was a notice for an open seat on the Homeowners Association board. The words seemed to jump out at me. Later that day, I was having coffee with Sarah on my new balcony. I mentioned the notice, almost as a joke. "Can you imagine me on a board?" I said, with a little laugh. Sarah put her cup down and looked at me, her eyes serious. "You have a voice, Eleanor," she said. "It's time to use it again." Something inside me clicked. She was right. I spent the next week talking to my new neighbours, listening to their concerns about the landscaping budget and the leaky roof in the clubhouse. I put my name on the ballot. And to my own surprise, I won. To fill the quiet hours, I started volunteering at the local animal shelter twice a week. I mostly sat in the cat room, a quiet space filled with the low hum of purring and the clean smell of pine litter. I would read a book aloud while a shy tabby or a three-legged calico curled up on my lap. Their trust was a small, warm weight that settled something deep inside me. The shelter manager, a young woman with kind eyes, stopped by one afternoon. "You're a natural with them," she said, watching me stroke a nervous little Siamese. "They just need a little patience," I replied, and I knew I wasn't just talking about the cats. I came home that afternoon feeling peaceful. The mail was on the little table by the door. Among the welcome letters from the community and a seed catalogue was a thick, formal envelope. It was from my lawyer. My heart did a little flip-flop. Inside was a letter he had forwarded from Brenda's divorce attorney. I sat down in my comfortable armchair, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. The divorce was getting bitter, my lawyer had warned me. Brenda's attorney was making a formal demand for significant alimony from Mark. I scanned the dense legal words until I found the reason. She was citing his expected and substantial future inheritance as a key asset in their shared marital finances. After everything, she was still coming for my money. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, slid 2 documents across his polished mahogany desk. The air in his office smelled faintly of old paper and lemon furniture polish. The first was a copy of the newly executed irrevocable trust. The second was a receipt for a very large, immediate donation I had made to the county animal shelter. "Is this clear enough, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice calm and professional. I picked up the papers. They felt heavy and final in my hands. "Perfectly clear, Mr. Henderson," I said. "Some things are best said on paper." He nodded, placing them into a thick courier envelope. I knew that by tomorrow morning, Brenda's dreams of my money would be officially and legally turned to ash. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Mark. His lawyer had just shown him a copy of the response Mr. Henderson sent. There was a long silence on the line, just the sound of his unsteady breathing. I waited, listening to the hum of my refrigerator. Finally, his voice came, thick with emotion. "I saw what you did, Mom." I looked out my condo window at the small, tidy balconies across the way. "I did what I had to do, Mark." "It was the right thing to do," he choked out. "Thank you." It wasn't the thank you of a son who had been saved from a mess. It was the thank you of a man who had just been shown the true cost of his own weakness. It was the beginning of something real between us again. A year passed. Life settled into a gentle, pleasant rhythm. I was now the chair of the HOA committee in my new community. I found I had a knack for it. I listened to people's complaints about the sprinklers and the parking spaces, and I found solutions. We started a community garden in the underused green space behind the clubhouse. "Eleanor, this garden is the best thing that's happened to this place in years," my neighbour Carol told me, holding up a perfect red tomato. The air smelled of rich soil and sunshine. "We did it together, Carol," I said, and I meant it. I felt my roots growing down into this new life, steady and strong. That summer, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I took a real vacation. Sarah and I, along with two other women from my book club, boarded a cruise ship to Alaska. I stood on the deck, wrapped in a thick wool coat, and watched enormous blue glaciers drift by. The air was so cold and clean, it felt like a brand new world. Sarah stood beside me, a mug of hot coffee warming her gloved hands. "Can you believe we're here?" she murmured, her breath making a little cloud. I watched a piece of ice carve off a glacier and crash into the sea. "Sarah," I said with a small smile, "I can believe anything about me now." For the first time in a long time, I felt profoundly and completely free. When I got back, Mark came for Sunday dinner. He looked better. The tired, haunted look was gone from his eyes. He told me he had paid off nearly half his debt, working weekends and living simply. We ate the roast chicken I'd made at my small dining table, the one that looked out over the community garden. When we finished, he put his fork down and looked at me directly. "I was weak, Mom, and I let her convince me that my weakness was concern for you. I will never forgive myself for my silence, for not protecting you." I reached across the table and patted his hand. His skin was warm. "You're rebuilding your life with honesty, Mark. That is all the apology I need," I told him. "Now, have some more potatoes." He gave me a watery smile and picked up the serving spoon. My friend Carol, from my old neighbourhood, called me on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my balcony, sipping my coffee, and watching the hummingbirds at the feeder. The sun felt warm on my face. "Eleanor, you will never guess who I saw at the mall," she said, her voice crackling over the phone. "Who's that, Carol?" I asked, not particularly interested. "Brenda, working at the Macy's makeup counter, selling lipstick." Carol paused, waiting for a reaction. I pictured Brenda in her crisp black uniform, forcing a smile, her feet probably hurting in cheap heels. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Is that so?" I said calmly. "Well, I hope she's doing all right." There was nothing else to say. Her life was her own now, built from the choices she had made. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of balance, like a scale finally settling at level. The next month, the animal shelter held a small party for its volunteers. It was in their community room, which smelled of disinfectant and faint, sweet hay. They served sheet cake and coffee in styrofoam cups. The director, a kind woman named Maria, tapped a spoon against her cup to get our attention. "And this year's Volunteer of the Year award goes to someone whose quiet dedication has touched every one of us," she announced. "Eleanor Vance." My friends from the shelter clapped, and I felt a blush creep up my neck. I accepted the little plaque and a certificate. A photographer from the local paper had me hold a tiny, trembling calico kitten for a picture. Later, Sarah brought me a copy of the paper. There I was, on page 3, smiling, the kitten tucked under my chin. "Look at you," Sarah said, tapping the photo. "A local celebrity." I looked at the picture of the happy woman staring back at me. I wondered if Mark would see it. I even wondered, for a brief moment, if Brenda would. Seeing my life so clearly on paper made me think about the future. I called my lawyer the next day. We met in his office, which smelled of old books and lemon polish. I watched as he printed the final documents. "So it's all set," he said, tapping the thick stack of paper. "We've created the new will and the irrevocable trust. A modest, fixed sum goes to your son, Mark. The remainder of the estate is for the animal shelter." I signed my name where he indicated. The pen felt heavy in my hand. That evening I called Mark. I told him what I had done, simply and without apology. He was quiet for a long moment. "Mom," he finally said, his voice thick, "the lawyer sent me a copy. It's the right decision. It's more than I deserve." "It's not about deserving, Mark," I told him, looking out at the evening sky. "It's about making sure your future is secure, and my legacy is safe. It protects us both." A future fortune was the one thing that could tempt a woman like Brenda to reappear. The next Saturday, I spent the whole morning in my plot at the community garden. I sank my hands into the cool, dark soil, the rich, earthy smell filling my senses. I carefully pulled out the tiny weeds that had sprouted around the base of my tomato plants. The sun was warm on my back, and I could hear the low buzz of bees working on the lavender bush nearby. My neighbour, Mr. Henderson, leaned over the fence between our plots. "Your roses are looking beautiful this year, Eleanor," he called out. I smiled, wiping a smudge of dirt from my cheek. "They just needed a little care," I said, "and plenty of sun." I looked at the neat rows, the sturdy plants, the promising buds. My new life felt just like this garden. I had planted it with care, pulled out all the poison, and now it was finally beginning to bloom. Mark came over for dinner a few weeks later. He looked different. Thinner, maybe, but his eyes were clear. The constant, weary tension was gone from his shoulders. We sat on my balcony and ate the chicken casserole I'd made. The air was soft, carrying the scent of my blooming jasmine. "I have some news," he said, setting down his fork. "They gave me the promotion at work, the regional manager position." "Oh, Mark, that's wonderful," I said, my heart swelling with a gentle pride. "You earned it." He looked out at the lights twinkling across the valley. "I'm doing it the right way this time, Mum. No shortcuts, no easy answers." I reached across the small table and patted his hand. He was rebuilding his own life, brick by honest brick. I finally felt that the last ghost had left my house. One afternoon, while sorting through the last few boxes from the old house, I found a small jewelry case tucked away in a larger carton marked "Attic." Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was my pearl brooch, the one my late husband, George, had given me for our 25th anniversary, the one Brenda insisted I had misplaced. I ran my thumb over its cool, smooth surface. It felt heavier than I remembered. Mark was there, helping me break down the last of the cardboard. He saw it in my hand. "You found it," he said, his voice quiet. "It was never lost," I replied, not looking at him. I turned it over and worked the little clasp. It was stiff from disuse. She just put it away for safekeeping. He winced at the coldness in my tone. Mum, I. It's all right, Mark. I pinned the brooch to the front of my cardigan. It settled right over my heart. That evening, I wore it to my HOE meeting. It felt like pinning a medal to my own chest. My next-door neighbour, Carol, had a granddaughter who was getting married. The girl, a sweet young woman named Jessica, was trying to learn how to knit a baby blanket for a friend. She was, in her own words, a complete disaster. I just can't get it, Eleanor. She sighed, dropping the needles into her lap for the 10th time. We were sitting in my small, sunny living room, the smell of lemon pound cake hanging in the air. I picked up her work. The yarn was a soft, buttery yellow. You're holding your hands too tight. You're trying to force it. I showed her again, my old, steady hands guiding her young, nervous ones. Knitting is about finding a rhythm. It's not a fight. One loop at a time, dear. That's how everything gets done. She finally managed a whole row without dropping a stitch. Her face lit up. Oh, I did it. Of course you did, I said, taking a sip of my tea. It felt good to build something, even if it was just a few rows of yarn. It felt even better to teach someone else how. 2 years to the day after that terrible Thanksgiving, Mark came for dinner. I made a simple roast chicken. We sat out on my little balcony as the sun went down, the air warm and smelling of the roses in the community garden below. We didn't talk about that day. There was no need. The silence was no longer heavy with things unsaid. Sarah and I are thinking of a river cruise next spring, I told him, refilling his glass of iced tea. Maybe somewhere in Europe this time. You should go, Mom, he said, looking out at the view. He looked older now, but the tired, haunted look was gone from his eyes. You've earned it. We talked about his work, about a funny movie he'd seen, about the new kittens at the animal shelter. We were just a mother and son having dinner. The past was a closed book, and I had no desire to read it again. Later that night, after Mark had left, I was washing the dishes. I caught my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I saw the silver in my hair, the lines around my eyes. But I didn't see the frightened woman I had become in that house. That woman was a ghost. She was afraid of knives, of calendars, of her own mail. She had allowed herself to shrink until she was almost invisible. I remembered Brenda's voice, dripping with pity. She's just not all there anymore. I dried my hands on a dish towel. That woman wasn't me, not anymore. I had found my strength not in a loud explosion, but in a quiet click. The click of a voice recorder, the click of a lawyer's pen, the click of my new front door locking behind me. I am sitting on my balcony now. The sun has set, leaving streaks of soft pink and purple in the sky. A light blanket is draped over my lap, and a warm cup of chamomile tea is in my hands. Below me, I can see the lights coming on in the little paths of the community garden I helped plan. I hear the gentle murmur of my neighbours talking, the distant sound of a dog barking. I take a sip of my tea. I am home. I am safe. I am free.